Thank you to the people who are supporting me on Ko-fi. You guys are keeping me alive. Welcome Home wasn't a show that cared much about crossovers. However, due to corporate demands, the kids' show was forced to create 3 crossover episodes between Our Darling Devil Bendy, a reboot of the popular 30s cartoon, for cross-promotional purposes. As expected, all 3 of these 40-minute long specials were super popular among adults and children alike. Of course, cartoon characters didn't really fit with the puppet show, so a dimension-hopping scenario was introduced. Accessible through Home's town clock. Unique 2D characters were created for Wally and the other neighbors, as well as puppets for Bendy and his posse. The first special was called Wally and the Stolen Ink, where the villain of Welcome Home, the Monochrome Gang, discover the portal to Bendy's world, and then steer the fabled ink machine to turn the world of Home just as monochrome as the Monochrome Gang. With the help of Bendy, Alice Angel, and Boris, the neighbors went on a child-friendly adventure to recover the ink machine. The second special had the Butcher Gang from the Bendy cartoon cause chaos in Home, requiring Bendy and his friends to once again partake in the recapture. The final special, Wally's Inky Christmas, was, as the name suggested, a Christmas special, since Wally and the Butcher Gang had been a little too action-y for the young audience of Welcome Home. The final special was a peaceful celebration of both shows, the first half happening in Home, the second in Bendy's world. However, since it was known that this was the final big event between the 2 franchises, a new character was introduced. You were an ink-themed puppet. Your name, Irene Inkenstein. As a puppet, you shared humanoid features similar to Wally and Julie. You wore a black dress and black bob cut, beige yellowish skin, and your arms looked like they had been submerged in the black tar-like ink of the Bendyverse. Luckily, they weren't sticky. If anything, it looked and felt more like dried glue or rubber. Though the introduction of your character was quite late in the show's lifespan. In other words, you were added during the final season of Welcome Home, not having much screen time as a result. You were always there during a group shot, of course. But other than that, you were just a background character. A passerby, a character used just to have someone sitting on a bench in the background or walking past the window of a house. Today you were shopping inside of Howdy Pilla's store. You needed a lot of items, specifically food, as for some reason you had been quite hungry these past days. And your fridge was completely empty. And your stomach was growling. Worst of all, even though you were eating more than double what you usually did, your weight was drastically going down. As you stepped in front of the counter, Howdy tilted his head. Normally the store owner was all smiles, but he looked worried. Having a party? He said in an attempt to lighten the mood. You didn't respond. You look terrible, he said finally. Are you eating okay? You looked down at the large amount of food. Does it look like I am? You replied dryly. Howdy refused pay, so you just put the stuff in a bag. But as you opened the store's door, he shouted after you, "Go see Frank!" Frank was the smartest puppet in the neighborhood, and should your situation get any worse, he would probably know what to do. You slowly walked over to your house at the other end of Home. A beautiful beige-yellow house with 2 bedrooms, big kitchen, though small bathroom, and a huge, open and warm, decorated living room. You step past your flowers, inside, ignoring the cheerful hello of Poppy as she was having her morning jog past your house. Inside your kitchen, you suppressed your hunger pangs, having just enough grasp on reality left to not just start eating your food raw. Instead, you just threw a large amount of random ingredients into a pan, put some water on it, setting the heat on high, and putting the rest of your shopping trip into the fridge. Your right eye felt droopy, and you were starting to get tired. The food started to bubble. The random assortment of meat and badly cut vegetables, creating a sort of grayish soup. Your nose felt stuffed as you tried to smell it. Sniffing, you rubbed over it, and just when it felt like your nose was finally free, something splashed into the meal. Something beige and black, tainting the soup, turning it entirely black. Grossed out, you used the wooden spoon to fish out the thing, and your eyes widened with horror. It was your half-liquefied nose. Panicking, you rushed to your telephone, only for your right leg to feel numb. You fell forward, slapping on the ground, just barely able to pull your phone's cord. Thank God there was a keypad in the phone's handset. Your fingers leaving behind colorful splotches on the keys as you dialed the number. Frank, at the moment, was inside his house with the town's painter Wally Darling, sipping tea and admiring his butterfly collection. Wally was here to draw a picture of a specific, recently acquired specimen, a butterfly from the world called IRL. The thing looked nothing like the butterflies of home. If anything, it looked quite horrifying in comparison. Its colors were mostly black, not rainbowish, its eyes beady and entirely black. It didn't even have a mouth. Instead, it had a very long, thin trunk. Frank just knew this thing was incredibly expensive and rare, and he just needed it painted. Your call came through just as he offered Wally the dried specimen. "Hello?" asked Frank. The puppet narrowed his eyes as a gurgling voice came through. "Who is this?" Wally looked up from the butterfly. "To be frank, I don't have time for..." "Is that Irene? Sounds like her." Frank paused and looked at Wally, who tilted his head. "What?" "Irene, is that you?" Whoever was at the other end, however, had already hung up. "Painter, what does this mean?" "It means we're going to put our things down and check on Irene." Frank sighed, ripping the framed butterfly out of the painter's hand. "Fine, then." Reluctantly, Frank hung it up on the wall before following Wally outside. As the men approached your house, they heard nothing. Normally, when you were present, you played loud music. This was concerning. Quickly opening your door, they discovered something horrifying in the middle of your living room. A large black puddle of tar-like ink. Merging from the middle of it, a half-humanoid puppet shape that was loudly sobbing through its bubbling, gaping mouth. "Oh God, Irene!" As he rushed into the house, past the creature. Wally didn't understand what was happening, but Frank did. Calmly, he walked up to the melting creature. "Frank, this thing, I think it killed Irene!" shouted Wally from the kitchen, where he had found only your torn clothes covered in sludge. Frank rolled his eyes, annoyed, as he helped the mess on the ground on the sofa. "Stupid painter, this is Irene!" Concerned, Wally wandered over. looking down at you as Frank consulted you. "You should have told me you're turning into a searcher. I could have helped you." You could no longer reply in your condition. "What's happening?" said Wally as he was close to tears at the horrible gestalt before him. "Ink people are much different from us puppets. Sure, they can eat our food, live in our world, even breed with us, but there's one fundamental difference. Something she didn't even seem to know herself." Frank was disappointed in himself. He should have assumed your ignorance. You were only a visitor in their world, after all, even though you lived here. "She requires ink to survive. Lots of it, in fact. Probably thought the hunger she was feeling was regular. No, it was a craving for this black stuff." "What do we do?" asked Wally. "We have 3 options." Wally listened intently. "She can become a searcher, meaning she'd lose her identity and humanity. I heard these make great pets." Wally deadpanned, and even though you were losing your grip on reality, you understood enough to feel deeply insulted. "I just take that as a no. Thankfully, I would not have wanted that for her either. Option 2, we get her into Bendy's world immediately, and she stay..." Your melting arm took hold of his throat, pulling him down into your face. Forcing his head up from your vice grip, he simply said, "Well, I guess we're taking option 3 then," sighed Frank as he wiped his face clean. "Everyone in home needs to work together, find all the ink we are storing. Printer ink, ink from pens, ink from bottles. I know Poppy writes her letters old school with a feather. She probably has a couple of those. And any paint with ink you got, Wally?" Well, I probably would work too, but don't think anyone in home owns a car, so that's out of the question. Get me your paint thickener. Might help too if you got that." Frank then clapped his hands in an almost excited manner. "In the meantime, I figure something out. Keep her alive until that time comes. Got it?" You had lost your sense of time. Occasionally your transformation felt almost blissful and calm, as it felt like you were floating on a river of dark ink. In other times you became painfully aware of the direness of the situation, making you awake, scream, and cry bitter tears of ink. All the while Wally was with you, sitting on a stool. They had transported you into home, Wally's sentient house, as it was closer to Frank's. Every day neighbors came by with ink cartridges of various things, from printer ink to pen ink. Even the monochrome gang helped. It was heavily rationed, of course, just enough to keep you from fully turning into a searcher. Wally never left your side, only occasionally being replaced by either Sally or Julie, so he could sleep. They all felt for you. You were currently situated inside of a bathtub, to avoid you ruining Wally's carpets, but also to keep as much ink together as possible. Frank wasn't sure if they really helped, but it was mostly for Wally and the others. Really, the feeding you ink procedure was a 50-50 on whether or not that was actually slowing it down. Wally gently moved his hand through your ink. He did that occasionally, when he got bored. He told himself it calmed you, though in reality you almost didn't feel it at all. Really only during the few minutes you were lucid. Once in a blue moon. And even then it only felt like a gentle warm touch, if anything. Inside of the black sludge you had become... Wally could occasionally see some faded colors, or chunks of puppet felt. So you haven't fully dissolved yet. The painter wondered how it felt, though in reality it really felt like nothing. The pain and humiliation you did feel at the start had become replaced by a thick veil of uncomfortable numbness, with an occasional jolt of panic due to the lack of oxygen you were feeling, similar to a very obese person trying to sleep on their back without an inhaler. Wally twitched. His fingers touched something. Or, no, they were touching something. Being touched by something. He looked down at his ink-covered arm. It was submerged somewhere between his wrist and elbow. Yes. There was. It felt like the tips of his fingers felt something, long and sharp, like finger bones. Wally exhaled, realizing that you're holding his hand. He blushed. Meanwhile, on your end of consciousness, however, it felt eerily similar. As you were floating on the river of sludgy ink, you had suddenly took... Your hand had suddenly taken hold of another. Your eyes filled with black liquid tears as you gripped tighter. It was the first warm touch you felt since this all happened. It was great. Slowly you exhaled, calming down. And it was as if for a moment your buoyancy in the ink increased. It was 2 weeks later. Wally by now looked very tired. Most denizens of home have stopped coming, simply because they had no more ink to spare, but it was today, on a glorious Monday, Frank frankly left his house, shirt covered in oil and ink. He didn't hesitate, knowing the gravity of the situation. Frank just stormed into Wally's house, ordered the painter to help him carry you over to his house with buckets. God, that was incredibly weird. Knowing that this sludge was you, separated in 4 buckets held in each of the men's hands. Meanwhile, on the other side, you could feel the movement. The ink ocean awoke, and quickly you were submerged, pulled down in the complete blackness of it all. Out of the bucket Wally was carrying in his right hand, a bony ink hand emerged, weakly feeling into the air, grasping at the slightest of sensations, before retreating back into the darkness. Frank now guided Wally down into his basement, where the grey puppet turned on the light. Wally gasped. "It might not be a perfect replica. It might create life like... It might not be a perfect replica. Might not even create life like it does on the other side, but to be frank, I'm sure this thing will keep her breathing." Using books from the bendy world he had acquired as a favor for helping with the butcher gang, Frank managed to build Holmes' very own ink machine. "It's incredible!" It was about the size of a small car. Nowhere near the size of the ink machines the puppets had seen before, but it was still impressive. "I substituted a lot. Don't expect miracles. I know we only have one shot at this, but this situation is quickly getting out of hand." Yes, I know," said Wally as he rushed past Frank. "What do we do?" "We simply pour her into there. There's a hatch on the top." With a shaking hand, Wally opened the heavy metal door, before pouring your inky liquid into it. "Next, we put my tincture into it. It's a mix of do-it-yourself ink. Ink thickener, water, boiled tea leaves, dissolved honey, some whiskey." Wait, whiskey? Frank shrugged before opening a barrel of his mixture and kicking it over so it could quickly flow into the ink machine. "Thought that stuff needed some kick." "Right. It's good whiskey, too. She owes me one for this. It was incredible. The entire time Frank had been working on this was just so Wally did a painting of his specimen. Only now he added a second condition, and it was just you owing him a simple favor. Say what you want about Frank, frankly. The guy was unbelievably kind, even if he pretended he wasn't. The grey puppet man turned on the machine. Sighing, he added, I wish I could have invited the others, but this was a matter of time. Frankly, I didn't want to waste any. The machine roared, shaking the ground. The unorganized shelves in Frank's basement fell over, shattering glass and clatter, and then it stopped. The machine was silent. Skeptically, Frank raised his unibrow. Out of the large pipe at the end of the ink machine now dropped black ink. It was thin like water for once. And then the machine grunted, and a thick black glob slammed onto the hard stone ground. Without hesitation, Frank placed his hand on Wally's eyes. Hey! Wally protested. I want to see what's going on! Are you alright? Asked Frank directly. Who, me? Put your hand away! Shut up, painter! You coughed. Using your hands, you swiped away the excess ink mixture. Once free, you stared down at the ground. At your fingers. You turned to face Wally and Frank. Embarrassed. Do you maybe have some clothes? After Frank had blindfolded the painter, the puppet man used a gardening hose to splash you clean. Despite the water being ice cold, you groaned in what was almost pleasure. It had been so long since you last felt something. A sensation, other than viscous slime. The feeling of water running through your fingers as your regular low beige felt came through was magical. You weren't even embarrassed being naked in front of Frank, so grateful you were. Though of course the over-analytical puppet didn't care for that. He gave you a towel and some spare clothes of his, a white shirt and black pants. A little big for you, but that was okay. After you were finally dressed, he allowed Wally to take the blindfold off. And Wally smiled. For the first time since the incident. He ran forward, embracing you. Hey, Wally, you said, embarrassed. I'm so glad you're okay, he said. Narrowing his eyes, however, Frank now pointed at its butterfly specimen. Wally rolled his eyes. Hey, Irene, let me tell you something. Everyone in home was working on this. Okay? I'll be busy here for a bit, so why don't you go and thank everybody? It was late at night. Your feet hurt from all the walking you did today, but your throat from all the talking, laughing, and singing. Everyone was so happy you were back. Frank had by now informed you that it would be best for you to enter his ink machine once every 3 months, just when you started to feel a little bit melty again. He'd expect payment in form of you singing for him, in return for mixing a barrel of his concoction, minus the whiskey. You stood before home now, the house looking at you curiously, and then you knocked, Wally opening it soon after. You were dressed in a trench coat. Hey, you said, blushing hard. Can I come in? Wally smiled. Sure, why not? You followed Wally inside. He sat you down in his home's living room. Frank told me that you were there. Always. You sat after a long silence between the two of you. He sighed, a little pained. Well, technically, Julie and Sally would sometimes take over for me. You nodded. Yes, and I'm grateful for that. I gave them chocolate as thanks. Honestly, you had given chocolate to everyone, but these two deserved a little extra. And Wally deserved so much more. I came because... Yes? I came because I felt your presence. He smiled softly at you. Well, sometimes I think I felt you too. You blushed harder in response to that. And you stood up. And that's why I'm here. I want to show you how grateful I am. Taking hold of the cord holding your coat together, you pulled it. The trench coat dropped to the ground with a loud thud. Wally's jaw dropped. You are dressed only in lingerie. His left eye twitched as you slowly approached him. Sitting down on his lap, you faked a lot of confidence right now. Honestly, you wanted to run away. Your fight-or-flight instinct kicking in the moment you pulled your cord. That's what your body was telling you, at least. But thankfully, Wally quickly took over. His soft hands sliding up and down your body. As his face came closer, he exhaled. His breath smelled like apple tea. Thank God. There was no bigger turnoff for you than bad breath. His lips touched yours, and he smiled. Your mouth, your tongue, your salvia, it tasted bitter like the ink you were made of, with just a slight hint of Frank's honey concoction. Sure, it was gross, but he didn't want to hurt your feelings. Not to mention, his thumb brushed over your chest, and he could no longer deny the pleasure he was feeling right now. It made him smile. He wanted to make a little joke about taking good care of you tonight, but technically already spent weeks doing so. So he suppressed it. Your own hands got now busy, gently tugging at the buttons of his blue suit. You were determined for this. You wanted this. This needed to happen. And it was him who helped your sanity. Your slimy black tongue pushed past his lips. A kiss so wet salvia was running down your chins. This night was going to be awesome.